Well, I think maybe we go ahead and get started. If people come, they come, but thanks for coming before February break, everybody. Um, yes, today that's just the normal. Today's going to be a lot of like Bitcoin and energy. Um, but I'll preface with I made the first iteration of these slides in November, and then I was updating them and I got a little carried away as per usual. So there's kind of a lot in them, but I'm not gonna like there's a lot of words on some slides, but I'm going to talk through it. And then also feel free to stop and ask questions at all, anytime. Okay. I made notes so that I'm more concise. Okay, so first, normal news update. I thought this was interesting. Like the gold ETFs have seen about 2.4 billion outflows this year, but Bitcoin ETFs have seen 4.5 billion inflows, which is interesting. Just some context. And also because the ETFs only launched like January 11th, 10th. So it hasn't been very long. Academic, there was a recent paper published kind of on the topic of a 51% attack on Bitcoin. And this is relevant for today because we're going to talk about proof of work and Bitcoin mining. But anyways, the TLDR of the report was basically that it's economically unfeasible for a 51% attack to be possible. And that I should backtrack, like if you control 51% of the network, you kind of like corrupt the network. I think that hopefully clarifies it. It would take, the report went through and said it would take, more than 20 billion just to obtain the ASIC machines, which are used to actually do the proof of work in mining Bitcoin. And they looked at Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it was interesting that their finding also said it would take 6 months to basically, have an attack on Ethereum, whereas Bitcoin, that would not be the case. This is just, and also like this is from one of the pieces I recommended you kind of subscribe to called The News Block by Natalie Brunell, but she also included a video from Andreas Antonopoulos, and it's kind of funny. It's like 2 minutes, but I want to play it for you. And he's like a super OG Bitcoin educator. I'll try and include more of his stuff in the resources. But
just a quick follow-up on that. Do you have any concerns about a large nation state that has interest in just actively destroying Bitcoin to make their own, super rigs and design chips and just throw hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to intentionally disrupt the blockchain?
Yeah, I don't worry about that at all. This cannot be done with Bitcoin anymore. This is something that can only be done with nascent altcoins. Bitcoin has achieved a level of computing that no single nation state can overthrow it through computation alone. The effort to do so would require a massive covert operation of chip fabrication, then the coordinated assault that would give them dominance over the next block for 10 minutes until we kick those bastards off the network, rework the protocol around them. They would be revealed. They would have lost $1 billion doing this, and all they got to do was one double spend. Now, here's the thing. Long before we get to that point, they figure out that if they just let this stuff run, they can actually get some Bitcoin as a reward because the incentive structure actually works. And so I'm not worried about that. And a lot of people are watching the blockchain. And as I said before, what are they going to do? So they take over and they fork the blockchain and they go somewhere, right? They've created an alternative blockchain. Great. What are we going to do? Who's going to join the NSA blockchain? Anybody want to jump on FedCoin? So we're all going to stay on the old fork. Difficulty will go down. It will get more profitable for the miners who stayed behind, and we'll carry on with our coin, and they can go mine whatever the hell they want on their alternative blockchain. They achieve nothing. They can't make protocol changes because we, as I said, 5 constituencies in consensus, and it would take $1 billion to pull the most ridiculous Keystone Cops failure in history. Plus, this would actually require government that can do IT.
also, so this is, from years ago, but on the last point, did anyone hear about like when the SEC had their Twitter hacked? Like, or kind of interesting cultural context now. Oops. Okay, this came out today, and I want to actually scroll through the tweet itself. But basically I'll just read this part of it right here. Okay, the European Central Bank said Bitcoin has failed to become a global decentralized digital currency, instead falling victim to fraud and manipulation. The recent approval of an ETF doesn't change the fact that Bitcoin is costly, slow, and inconvenient. And then it's interesting, like, sorry, I don't know if you can kind of see this, but like readers then added a ton of context kind of saying the alternative. And then it's just like reading through, these are really funny. So like, for instance, the first one, like the euro has lost 99.5% of its value versus Bitcoin in less than 10 years. So just, let's see, like ton of, and this is why I recommend maybe get on Twitter, just anonymous, like you can see all of this. Let me press. Yeah, Daniel Batten, I'm going to reference him a lot today during these slides. Anyways, there's just a ton of really good comments in here that I would recommend if you're on Twitter, going looking through later. Okay. And then okay, next in world. So has anyone heard of Alexei Navalny? Like maybe in the news. But anyways, he has been a prominent Russian dissident, and he had been serving a 19-year prison sentence, and he was murdered recently. And so this, I think, this is also from the Financial Freedom Report that I recommended subscribing to last time. So it just does a really, good job covering all the news that's happening and also describing this case. So I wanted to highlight that. And then week 1, I had a news update about basically Biden, this, order to go to all the Bitcoin miners and ask for a ton of really kind of infringing data, or I don't know if infringing is the right word, but anyways, this is kind of a follow-up to that, like a whole thread on how it's politically motivated, and just another recommended read to that news update. Okay, so yes, lesson number 3, but I got carried away, as I mentioned. So what do I want you to take away at the end of this? Any of the following, like, wow, or I'm kind of curious, or skeptical, or questioning. Like, that's all good. There will be a lot. You can tell me to slow down, clarify, but just so that it's, what am I expecting? Like, you don't need to walk out of here remembering, any of this. Just like emotion takeaway is good. Yes, some of the numbers might be a little outdated because I made kind of the first iteration of this in November, and then where I've seen recently, I tried to update it a little bit, but just putting that out there. This does not have anything to do with energy for today, but I wanted to show it because I know just after the meetings, people asking questions about the volatility of Bitcoin, or that it's on a lot of people's mind. So this is a really cool chart, and it just shows like growth and volatility together. And this is from Unchained. They're another good resource of information in the space. But it's pretty interesting to see that perspective. I'll just fast forward a little bit. So yes, wanted to share that. Okay. Try every time I X out, then I have to redo. Okay. This is kind of going to set the stage for today. There is a Bitcoin documentary coming out called Dirty Coin. And this is the teaser, or the first teaser video for it.
When I'm talking about flexible load and even data centers, everybody's fine. And the moment I say the word Bitcoin, conversation's over.
At one estimate, annual global Bitcoin mining uses more electricity than the entire nation of the Netherlands.
Bitcoin in general is wasteful by design.
One Bitcoin transaction is equal to throwing away 2 iPhones.
Burns as much electricity as the country of Argentina.
It's wrecking their grid.
Doesn't make any sense. It's a giant pyramid scheme.
Bitcoin mining does consume a lot of power. It's the reality of it, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
a lot of facilities, mining rigs and facilities will attach themselves to energy infrastructures that have basically unused energy.
What if you turn that flared gas into another product that you could sell?
We're not really looking at the problem in totality.
The energy that we're sourcing is from green renewable resources.
Why wouldn't we want to produce that kind of energy for a new financial system that creates freedom, transparency, independence?
We have the flexibility to shut off when the grid demands additional capacity and power. That flexibility is a very unique property to Bitcoin mining.
So if we compare one Bitcoin transaction to 100,000 Visa transactions, Bitcoin will still require up to 10 times more electrical energy per transaction.
I think we're in an incredibly pivotal moment right now in the evolution of Bitcoin mining.
The next wave of Bitcoin adoption comes from the energy companies.
Bitcoin and the changes that it implies will not just be rainbows and unicorns, because we're replacing a system that has a lot of debt built up. And I don't just mean monetary debt, but more ecological debt.
The most cost-effective ways of generating power to power Bitcoin mining are actually solving key energy infrastructural challenges.
So we've got a stigma attached to Bitcoin that's actually standing in the way of us doing what we need to do to make the transition to a decarbonized economy.
Anyways, so it'll be very exciting when this comes out. And Alana, the woman who's producing this, she also created another kind of precursor called Stranded, and it's a 17-minute short film. And I hosted a screening of it last semester, but it'd be very cool if we could do it again so you all can see it. But so this is where we're going for today. Some resources. So the first one, why Bitcoin only? Like, there's so much on this website. If you just Control F, basically anything you want, there's a ton. This is the Bitcoin Mining Desk book, another great place, like resources. And then have you all heard of Michael Saylor or Robert Breedlove? The Saylor series, it's long. Maybe just like when you're walking around campus, but it's really good. It starts at like the very beginning, of energy and carries through. So highly recommend. But it is long. So where does Cornell stand in all of this? So in October, there was a report that came out from people here, and it said Bitcoin could support renewable energy development. So that's interesting, just some context given where we are. Okay, now let's start over proof of work. Also want to preface, like I've shared this in previous slides of, what is Bitcoin? Why is it only at, why is it capped at 21 million? So I just wanted to, I think it's relevant to have it in here again. And we're going to work through like how, the halving, what that is, how long it takes through these slides. This is kind of the code or part of it as to, when is the Bitcoin halving? I'm going to talk about that. Why can there only be 21 million? Oh, and I should note the source here, this is a blog post and it like goes through the code like step by step. If you're kind of more technical and interested, that's a good resource for you. So we are in the fourth, do you say epoch? How do people say it? Epic? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. So this just some context. So the first one was from when the Genesis block of Bitcoin, so January 3rd, 2009 to November 28th, 2012. And you'll notice it's every 4 years, which is about, every 210,000 blocks. And we are coming up to the end of the fourth epoch. And I think this is, so Jameson Lopp, another really kind of OG Bitcoiner, I just think this is cool, but he posted this. It was like, don't touch anything because the next halving, we don't know exactly when it will be yet, but it would be April 20th, 2024, which like if you just put the numbers backwards, it's the same thing, which is kind of cool. But just some context of where we are right now. Okay, so this, I'll work through this and happy to kind of say it again because it took me a couple iterations to wrap my head around it. But basically, actually, I'm going to switch to this one. So all Bitcoin will be mined over a span of 131 years. It's going to go from January 3rd, 2009 to some month day 2140. So that, every 4 years, or every 210,000 blocks, you get into a new epoch. You have the halving. And that's what's coming up in April. So, going back to this math, sorry, I'm switching back and forth, but how do we keep everything in order to make sure, that we're staying on schedule, and that in 2140, we will have mined all 21 million Bitcoin? This is where something called the difficulty adjustment comes into place. And I'm going to show a video on proof of work. Sorry, maybe I should have reordered the slides. But basically, every 2016 blocks, the code checks, is it too hard or too easy to mine a Bitcoin? And it's all in the interest of making sure that on average, every 10 minutes, a new block is mined. So again, it's every 2016 blocks, about every 2 weeks, it does this check, automatically in it. It's called the difficulty adjustment. Last week, I talked about Executive Order 6102. So here's just that number again. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's kind of a reversal in history that, your property is yours. No one can take it from you. A reversal in precedent that the money supply is not something that can always just be increased. I also think it's kind of cool. 21 million has like 2, 1, and 6 zeros, just the recurrence of the same numbers. But going back, and actually I should pause. Anyone have any questions right there? Want me to re-explain any part? Okay, and I also have a video like actually explaining what proof of work is. But if you're curious, like, how much percent of Bitcoin is there left to be mined, or, where are we currently? So we have 21 million Bitcoin, and how much you get for adding, the reward for Bitcoin that you get when you add a block changes depending where you are. So in the first epoch, the reward was 50 Bitcoin. And then 4 years later, it went to 25 Bitcoin every time you added a block. What's interesting is that in each epoch, the block reward is equal to the percent of Bitcoin mined in that epoch. So in the first one, you got 50 Bitcoin as a reward every time you added a block. We had, after those first 4 years, 50% were mined and 50% remained. Right now, where we are, in April 20th-ish, there will have been 93.75% of Bitcoin mined, and we have 6.25% remaining. And currently, the block reward is 6.25 Bitcoin. Was that confusing? Because I think I maybe could do a better job explaining it. So let me thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up. Okay, cool. So if you're ever like, oh, I wonder, where we are in the process, this is just a way to kind of know. Okay, so we just went over that. This is another cool graph that I saw recently of, who owns the Bitcoin? Where is it? So, 21 million Bitcoin. The first 1 million Bitcoin have never moved. That's kind of like Satoshi's Bitcoin. There's 11.97 million is held by individuals. And then businesses, 758,000. ETFs, like if you remember the first news update where it was like, what was it? 4.5 billion or something, went in, they have 818,000 Bitcoin. And then there's only, about 1.38 million left. And so what I think, and this will take like 116 years to get all of that. And so, my kind of skepticalness, like the ETFs have about-ish the same amount that, just they have it, that it will take the same amount to get like 116 years to also get. So just for your context, but now, like actually understanding what Bitcoin mining is, what is proof of work. This is an interview with D++, and she just, I'll try and recommend more of her things because she does an incredible job of explaining very complex things very simply. So we'll play this.
Target. So these Bitcoin mining computers, they're not so much solving these complicated cryptographic puzzles. They're essentially just guessing and checking numbers.
Yep, it's a brute force process. It's actually really simple. If I brute forced your password, would you say that I was solving a cryptographic puzzle or I was solving a really hard math problem? No, I was just guessing different possible inputs. So that's exactly how mining works. Now, these miners are really, really good at guessing. They're really, really good at doing SHA. So in fact, they're so good at doing SHA that the hardware has been designed specifically to only do SHA. And that's why we consider
Quick pause. When she says do SHA, she's referring to the algorithm that Bitcoin uses, which is SHA-256. And so in the first teaser, do you all remember those, like, all those machines on racks? So that's a Bitcoin miner. It's called an ASIC. And all they can do is run this one algorithm, this guessing and checking. So just wanted to clarify that.
Mining to be application specific. We use ASICs or application specific integrated circuits. They're designed to just do SHA really, really, really fast. So this random number that I'm popping into the block header, like you said, it has a special name, and that's a nonce. A nonce is a number used once. It's just a random number, and you're going to see nonces all over the place in cryptography. So the process of mining is the process of finding that golden nonce that when plugged into the block yields a hash less than a given target. Now, the target that I used for my simulate.
Okay, so basically often you'll hear that, okay, Bitcoin mining is solving these cryptographic hash puzzles or math puzzles. And it's not, it's literally just guessing, checking numbers. And then the difficulty adjustment, which I just want to go back just so you can see this right here. So you see how there's like a lot of zeros. There's ways you can just kind of change this so it makes it easier or harder. So if the network, if you can see that blocks are coming in about, on average every 8 minutes, then it's too easy. It needs to become harder. And so it'll just update and it will self-correct in that sense. If it's like 12 minutes, it'll get a little bit easier so that on average it's every 10 minutes.
So target. So these big speak in Miami.
Sorry. Okay. This is just another good thread in here. You can reference if you want to later. But now we're gonna move on to talk about energy, and Bitcoin, but I didn't know anything about energy before I learned about Bitcoin. And so I think it's good to just kind of try and set some context. So conventional energy sources is like coal, oil, renewable energy sources like solar, hydro, wind. So just some context there. Oh, also I meant to say an interesting note on this. So you'll see nuclear in this graphic up here on conventional energy, but in like spring 2023, the EU came out because like all the geopolitics on energy sources, the EU came out and they labeled nuclear as like low carbon, not green, but they're kind of like changing the narrative of how they consider nuclear to be classified. So just adding that in there for you. So let's just look at energy in history generally. So I think we can all see this okay. Lynn Alden, another very good reference. I'll probably reference her throughout other slides. But what she's pointing out here is that it's pretty recent that the world kind of has this energy abundance. And so you can see there's like a little green dot there, and here that's where she said like when her dad was born. And then you can see like that's like looks like maybe 1940s. And then you just see all these, increase in other energy sources, energy abundance. And she says that the growth in energy played a large role in why the population could even increase so quickly. Running water, electricity, specialization in tech increases, like that's all really important for the kind of growth and development of humanity. However, some other context in here is that, with the climate narrative and climate change, they right here at some point, pro-climate action became anti-energy. And so we're going to kind of work through this, but I want to put that just common theme narrative in your head right now. And also, so this was kind of circulating a lot on Twitter. This has 2 million views in early January. And basically it says 89% of Ivy League graduates favor the strict rationing of gas, meat, and electricity to fight climate change. But what I'd like to offer today and work through is how actually energy is good and we need more energy, not less energy. And then ultimately we'll come back to this idea here and say, you know, you can like be pro climate and pro energy, and how Bitcoin specifically incentivizes the build out of renewable energy infrastructure and helps facilitate the energy transition, or just what you would want in ways that the incentives don't align to ever do that without Bitcoin. Okay, sorry, this is also not directly related, but I want to just put out a cautionary kind of tale here. So who's heard the term central bank digital currency? Yeah, okay, a decent number of people. So I'm gonna play this video for you, and then we'll talk.
Through technology, and we're developing.
Also, I should say this was in May 2022, or this was when it was posted, but it was at I can't remember if it was at Davos, but it was like World Economic Forum. That's the context.
Through technology and ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on. We're developing.
Yeah, so basically this idea of, like kind of on the narrative of, okay, you should, really be conscious of your carbon output, and wouldn't it be so cool if you could track it? Hopefully, like some alarm bells are ringing in your head that it's such an invasion of privacy if they can know when you're traveling, how you're traveling, what you're doing, what you're buying. We're going to talk about this in later ones, but I just felt like it was relevant to mention here, so like the seed is planted. Yes, okay, so this was just like a meme that was related to the Kardashev scale, but let's just talk about what this is. And this is like kind of the meme's like where you start and where you end up. Okay, so what is the Kardashev scale? Basically in the 60s, this Russian astrophysicist, Nikolai Kardashev, proposed it. And basically the framework to measure like the technological advancement of a civilization based on their current energy consumption. And basically that it's for a civilization to kind of advance and flourish, it needs to harness all the energy available to it. And so we're going to talk about a concept of stranded energy, like basically energy that's out there, but you just can't capture and use it. And so that's what like Bitcoin mining helps to capture this energy that is stranded amongst other things. But this is kind of the framework there. And then it goes on to say, access to affordable, reliable, like a lot of renewable energy sources are intermittent, which means, like solar power. Well, what if it's like today, it's rained all day? That's kind of an example of what intermittent is. But having affordable, reliable, sustainable energy is essential for economic and social development. And I have a graph kind of looking at this, but for many parts of the planet, that's not the reality. They don't have reliable energy that's also affordable. So it leads us to energy. So yeah, we've talked about this, human flourishing directly correlated with energy. And yeah, just some more tweets. This one, Bitcoin is a pioneer species. This is one of the documents I put in the resource folder, but I pulled out some snippets from it. So Bitcoin mining is literally paying for electrical infrastructure to be built in third world countries where no one is willing to invest. And in the Stranded document precursor or short film, that's kind of the storyline of that. So this is a chart right here, and basically it's showing how GDP per capita is directly correlated to energy consumption per capita, and he also writes like it wouldn't change that much if you replaced it with standard of living. So basically another takeaway is Bitcoin mining is everything you don't know about energy combined with everything you don't understand about Bitcoin. Hence why it's very easy to get down a rabbit hole in Bitcoin. But yeah, I recommend that piece if you're interested. Also, this is a good book I would recommend. It's very long, so maybe not, but just putting it out there. Yes, this is just some good quotes, but we'll kind of skip by that. So, energy misconceptions. Warning, there's like a lot of words, but we're not like, ignore the words. We're just going to go across like the bolded parts. So basically what I said, like energy doesn't travel well and cannot be easily stored. That's one. Energy does not equal electricity. And other misconceptions like energy grids are forced to overproduce, but like, and this will all make sense as we go through later. But there's some kind of, all the non-bold is it's like a rebuttal to that. And then this number 4, I think is really important, and it's going to come across in some of the other slides, but basically it says consuming electricity doesn't necessarily produce additional CO2. And so basically the important classification here is that it's through electricity generation, not consumption, where that carbon comes into play. So just some more concept of stranded. These are some good. This is the kind of banner for the film. And then a very long article, but very good, by Alex Gladstein that I would recommend if you're interested. And it's pretty recent. It just came out at the end of January. So moving on to some renewables misconceptions. And this comes from Daniel Batten, who I really recommend. So Troy Cross, Margot Pays, Daniel Patton, they're all really great, and I have all the sources linked in here. But for instance, like the first one, Bitcoin competes with other users for energy, like hospitals, residential. But actually, no, like there's very few. Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. It's a Bitcoin club, but you're welcome to stay if you'd like. I have the room from till 6:30. Yeah, thank you. No, that's okay. So that Bitcoin competes, but no, like it's actually, they don't want to compete. Bitcoin miners want the cheapest energy they can have. They have like the electricity cost, the miner itself, and then I think internet cost. So you want to keep all your costs down. So they don't want to compete, hence why they look to renewable sources, which are much more inexpensive. So just some more, again, I don't want to go through all of them. This is another quick video kind of on misinformation. And the reason I want to play this is because kind of have a recent example of a big misinformation campaign coming in the slides later.
This is one of the techniques of misinformation. You use the same source, but you run it through multiple different outlets. And so if I take a source of information that is debunked and not peer reviewed, and then I get it reprinted into multiple different media sources, then I have the next round of that misinformation campaign, which is that the next people who are quoting it, they're not quoting it from that same one source. They're quoting it from a multitude of other media. So now you have one debunked, unpeer-reviewed claim that has then fed into multiple clickbait headlines. And that cycle just keeps repeating itself over and over. And this is where they get these sort of outrageous claims that ignore all the data and facts and science of what Bitcoin mining is. And they end up with quotations in the media like every Bitcoin transaction equates to 2 iPhones being thrown in a landfill. This is a perpetuating cycle of misinformation, and it is done intentionally, unfortunately, and it is one of the hallmarks of a misinformation campaign.
So we're going to talk about one, there was kind of from Cambridge, they had a report that like way overestimated and still does the emissions of Bitcoin. But they ended up kind of submitting like an update like, oh, actually we had that wrong, but that's one thing that has been cited a ton. Okay, so Greenpeace, has anyone know what Greenpeace is? Heard of it before? Yeah. Okay, so basically I looked on their website how they describe it, but it's like a global network of independent campaigning organizations that use peaceful protest and creative confrontation to expose global environmental problems and promote solutions that are essential to a green, just, and joyful future. But it's, follow the money. Where are they getting their money from? So Ripple is another kind of, it's a big crypto, and they're I think co-founder right here, chairman of Ripple, basically was they were kind of the first funder of this, and it's kind of like a campaign to like change the code and make Bitcoin more sustainable. But we're gonna play a couple of their clips. So that was real, like that actually happened. And there's another one. But just keep in mind the idea of like misinformation, where it's coming from. Let's go to the next. Oh no, don't play again. Sorry. Okay. I'll skip over this, but basically like so Ethereum used to be proof of work. So they, used to use energy inputs. Now they're proof of stake, so they don't. But basically these are all the different things that we're going to kind of talk about, and they now cannot do. Let's see. Sorry, there should be a video. Okay, so yeah, they showed like Jamie Dimon in it, and how he said it's just a pet rock, it's a hyped up fraud. Maybe I'll find a different tweet that kind of covers this. But anyways, I'll skip over this in the interest of time. But just oh, sorry, I was looking for something to put into this, but I couldn't find it. This is another like big kind of meme that was meant to kind of be bad towards Bitcoin, but then Bitcoiners kind of adopted it and like was like, oh, so cool, it's all Satoshi. So I'll just play a little bit of this.
Think Bitcoin's not bad for the environment? Think again. Introducing my newest collaboration with Green. I'm Benjamin Von Wong, and I use art to raise awareness for issues like plastic pollution and climate change. 6 months ago, I was studying the impacts of climate change in Greenland, where I saw firsthand what the climate crisis looks like. Greenland's ice sheet is melting fast, and witnessing it with my own eyes was absolutely gut-wrenching. That's where I met Rolf from Greenpeace and learned about how fixing Bitcoin could help solve climate change. Here's Rolf.
Greenpeace's campaign to change Bitcoin's code so it stops fueling the climate crisis and harming communities. Bitcoin is the world's most popular digital currency, and right now it's using as much electricity as entire countries, and most of that's coming from polluting fossil fuels like coal and gas. Bitcoin's climate damage got 125 times worse in just 5 years, but with the code change, we can cut the electricity needed to run Bitcoin by more than 99%.
But how to make sure that people pay attention? Enter the Skull of Satoshi, a symbol I built connecting Bitcoin and environmental destruction. This
Yeah, so that's kind of the gist there. We're gonna go through like how Bitcoin is actually has the lowest emissions in any industry, how it uses like 60% renewable energy sources-ish, but like it just said like, oh no, majority comes from coal, fossil fuels. Actually, no. Just misinformation perpetuating. Okay, so yeah, I'm not gonna play this, but recommend going back, listening to this. This happened earlier this year. Just again, like, oh, Bitcoin's carbon emissions are so bad, but we're gonna now go through this. Okay, takeaway from this, you don't need to read anything on this slide. You can go back, look later. But so Troy Cross, he's the first person in the teaser video that you saw. And it's like when people hear Bitcoin, they just tune off, like they don't think anything good comes from it. And so all of this stuff from Greenpeace came out, and he kind of wrote this response. It's like, okay, if they actually, you know, had any interest in, I'll quote their thing, like promoting solutions that are essential to a green future, then they would have actually, you know, looked into many, many things. Like, for instance, if they cared about Bitcoin's impact on the environment, they'd have learned about methane mitigation, whether on oil fields or in landfills. They haven't. So he just goes through he's a very good writer. He goes through, you know, all these different things about, okay, if you say you actually care about this, then these are the steps you would have taken. But actually, no, none of that has been the case. And I put some reports in here that I want to distill a little bit. And one thing he mentions is the KPMG report, which basically says like Bitcoin is the ultimate ESG asset. So we're going to go through that. But yeah, basically he's like, the only thing they've done is just like complain and like say Bitcoin's bad. And so continuing on, yeah, this is just another response. But I want to just highlight one thing because Freddie News says, he says a lot of like misinformation and issues about Bitcoin's energy comes from the perception that Bitcoin is useless. But I included a lot of examples of how that's not quite true. So we're going to go through that, but that's like the one takeaway I'd like you to have from this. And so, yes, I'm going to skip over this and get to some examples. So how much energy does Bitcoin use? So I want to go through this. Okay, so you can see, you can kind of compare. So let me scroll. And there's this is a really interesting website. If you ever just curious, you can kind of look at it. So here is air conditioning. And here's Bitcoin. So, hi, I think the exam's starting a little bit later. The exam, I think they'll come in at 6:25. Yeah, thank you. So here's Bitcoin. Like, you know, okay, let's keep in mind, Bitcoin uses more energy than countries, you know, all of that. And then let's look at like air conditioning or fashion. It's pretty close to tobacco, like tourism. So I think context and perspective is just really important. And this, you can kind of see a lot of this on here. Okay. So now to get to this report that KPMG put out. So so ESG, environmental, social governance, that's like where we're going through this. So they list out 4 strategies of how you can actually reduce the carbon footprint. And so I'm not going to talk through all of these right here. But for instance, methane reduction is one, and Troy Cross mentioned that as well. And that's just like a brief summary if you're interested. Social. So for instance, like, you know, about 1.4 billion people don't have access to bank accounts. I think that's actually like, well, if you consider like all the people that live under an authoritarian regime, or like women who often in many places don't have access to their own financial kind of structures, their own bank accounts. So there's a huge social component to this, that Bitcoin can bank all 8 billion people. And there, you know, if you self-custody your Bitcoin, your wealth, your property can't be taken from you. Fundraising, like there's like the whole remittances thing and how Bitcoin you can send value across borders basically instantly and for, you know, close to free. So there's a huge social component. And then governance, basically, if we think back to like week 1 and week 2 about the blockchain trilemma and how Bitcoin is structured, very decentralized, very secure, like having a robust and highly redundant governance feature is an inherent part of how it was designed. So all that to say, like there's, all the environmental benefits, social, and then governance kind of makes it their claim is, Bitcoin is the ultimate ESG asset. So then these are just some different charts, like looking at sustainability. Bitcoin mining is the single most sustainably powered global industry in the world. Flashback to a couple minutes ago in that Greenpeace campaign where it's saying, no, like, it shows the ice caps and, oh, Bitcoin, it's so bad for the climate. I think just context is good. So you can see here. So here's the number. Daniel Batten again suggests that 52.6% of all mining is being done sustainably. And remember, it's not just because, Bitcoin miners are, they want to use, it's purely a financial incentive. They want the cheapest energy sources they can have. So just the idea of incentives from all sides of this topic of conversation is really important. This is just more because it was talking about, in one of the videos, like transactions, and how much energy it uses in banking. So for instance, like then this first graph, you see like energy and expenditure from Bitcoin mining, gold mining, banking system. So just like, this is just all kind of tying back to some of the other videos. And then here's another one, like same thing, just different sources. So hopefully this is just kind of putting into context a lot of claims that are made and just above anything else, when you hear something, just question like, where are they getting their information from? Are they just reciting the same sources? Or like who's funding them? Because then you can just go and like really find the facts. This is interesting because this will come up in another slide I have later on. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think, even though I've read this so many times and looked at it, I don't know if I fully entirely understand, but the general point here is that if you look at Bitcoin's growth through any metric, if it's like hash rate, total users, price, basically the emissions will be like the same at the end as they were at the start. So even if you have all this growth, it doesn't mean like all the emissions grow with it. That's my takeaway. There's, someone can definitely correct me, but I believe that's what it's showing. And yeah, again, so it's the lowest emissions intensity of any major global industry. So for instance, like we have gold, banking, Bitcoin mining. And yeah, this is just like an update. He posted this recently. Actually, Bitcoin's major energy source is hydropower, not coal. Fossil fuels, yes, like you can see on here, coal is 22.9%. So that is there. But just if you look holistically, it's around that 52.6 to 60% renewable energy sources. Okay, so this is the kind of Cambridge report that I was talking about, and they this summer at the end in August, they put out like an updated, actually this is our new assessment on how much electricity Bitcoin consumes, and they then also, they're transparent about like how they evaluated it before, what metrics they were looking at and what they should do differently. So number 2, clear evidence that Greenpeace USA's claim that Bitcoin used as much energy as Sweden was incorrect. So you remember in that video where it's like on like all the different buildings in New York City, and it's like Bitcoin uses more energy than countries. So here you can see like, okay, they could be referring to this statement that it uses as much energy as Sweden, but look, no, actually it's incorrect, and it's been proved that. And so again, like the air conditioning, like you could also look at it with tumble dryers, like, your dryer at home. And so anyways, just they are still, I think, overestimating by 67.6%, but previous estimates were over like 106%. So, just context is good. And here, like, it just talks about their methodology and how they improved it, and it had to do with the mining hardware distribution, I believe. Yes, let's skip over this. So, okay, Margot Page, she's incredible. I highlighted a couple of her pieces later on. But I put this in because I showed you kind of this electricity consumption index, and she just has a note on how you should look at, I think, sorry, let me just make sure I say this correctly. She says like there's monthly total and yearly total, and just how you should look at those different totals. So yes, this is new. She just wrote a piece that I think I included last week. I can't quite remember. Basically debunking the UN's claims about Bitcoin's environmental footprint. And so this, I think, is going to be a YouTube series if you're interested. And then on the left, this is just like a lot of peer-reviewed and scientific literature that has recently come out. Cornell's is the first one in the thread, which is interesting. Okay, another report, but I think this is like, maybe if you remember nothing else from today, this is pretty important. So basically in 2017, the World Economic Forum, remember, same like video with your carbon reduction tracker, claimed that Bitcoin will consume more energy than the world is able to produce. Today, it uses like less than 1% annually of the world's total energy. So, they make these big statements like, oh, in 2020, Bitcoin's going to use more power than the world does today. Actually, here we are, 2024, it uses less than 1%. And so again, like keep in mind the UN Bitcoin bad for the environment, and then the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And how we started this whole conversation. Abundant, cheap energy forms the bedrock of our civilization and is essential to poverty alleviation and human flourishing. Without Bitcoin mining, the sustainable development agenda is kind of doomed to fail because it incentivizes the build out of this type of cheap energy forms. Okay, this is a lot, but these are just from this report, like 7 opportunities of how Bitcoin mining can be helpful. Efficient management of electricity grids. This is natural gas flaring, venting. So basically just like think of just like gas is just like, I should have a video here, just like flared up into the sky. Basically, Bitcoin can help capture that and not have all that just like literally like lighting gas on fire. Maybe there's a visual in your head now. Accelerating adoption of wind and solar energy. We'll just kind of go through so generally, and this is how does it do it? Yes. So then I put this graph in here because I think just in the context of like the very first, kind of one of the first slides I showed from Lynn Alden, where it's like how we have this abundance of energy through different sources. And then if you look here, like who will use all of this excess electricity? So again, think about the incentive, like Bitcoin miners don't want to go compete with other people to pay, expensive prices for their energy. No, they just would rather come and use energy that's not being used, energy that's stranded. So just some context there. And okay, one of the first slides where I said, like, keep in mind the idea of like pro-climate, anti-energy, pro-energy, anti-climate, all of that. So this is just a good video where Margot, who I mentioned previously, she says like kind of a message that's pretty hopeful, like, we can solve climate change ourselves. We can, be a part of this conversation and have some power in it. Through Bitcoin mining is one avenue. So pro-climate doesn't need to mean you're anti-energy, and being pro-energy doesn't mean you're anti-climate. So I think just generally in society, people like to divide, but I think this is a good use case of like, no, like we don't need to create these divisions of like, us versus them. Like we can work on this collectively. Yeah, sorry, a lot of papers there. Okay, this is what I was, how I mentioned spreading news, saying, okay, I think where's the origin of all of this misinformation about Bitcoin, or like, where does it stem? And he suggested maybe it's because people think Bitcoin has no use. So this is a really good thread that Jan Pritzker, Bitcoiner, put together on Twitter, which I just took and put it into slides. Also, if you're interested in the technicals of Bitcoin, he wrote a very good book, which is free, called Inventing Bitcoin. So I'm just like, I'm not, I'm not really gonna go talk through all of these, in the interest of time, because I think we need to go, for this exam. But we will finish this probably next semester so they can get in here and take their exam. But thank you. I know that was a lot, but I appreciate everyone coming, and have an awesome February break as well.